everybody, and thanks for joining me in my room again. And time for another Beatles US album review. And this is probably my favorite US album. Aptly titled The Beatles' second album. Technically not the Beatles' second album, but it was the Beatles' second album for Capitol in America. Technically, it was the Beatles' third album in America. In England, they were already working on the stuff for A Hard Day's Night. But there you go. Electrifying big beat performances by England's Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. That was done deliberately. They also wanted to show them as individuals. The back blurb here: never before has show business seen and heard anything like them. And here they are, the world's most popular foursome, singing and playing their new collection of hits, The Beatles' second album. Attention to detail on these US albums that came out. And Bruce Spicer in here, this was very interesting. He says, when choosing the tracks for the company's first Beatles album, Dexter had passed on the 5 cover versions of songs previously recorded by American rock and roll and rhythm and blues artists on With the Beatles. He wanted to showcase the songwriting abilities of the group. In addition, Dexter most likely thought that Americans would not be interested in hearing an English band play such songs. Not good there. The view quickly changed in mid-February 1964 when several American record stores began carrying a disc containing 2 Beatles recordings then unavailable in America: Roll Over Beethoven and Please Mr. Postman. So with the strong interest in Roll Over Beethoven, it convinced Dexter the 5 leftover cover tunes from With the Beatles would form the cornerstone of Capitol's second Beatles album. Due to its belief that hit singles make albums, Capitol wanted to place a hit single on the record, and the company's legal department was familiar with the licensing agreement under which Swan Records had issued the single She Loves You and I'll Get You. So that's the deal there. And they also got Can't Buy Me Love's B-side, You Can't Do That, which was not on the album. So you take She Loves You back with I'll Get You, and also the flip side to From Me to You, which is Thank You Girl, and the R&B covers, as well as 2 songs from the EP Long Tall Sally and I Call Your Name, and you get the Beatles' second album. Why is this probably my favorite of the US albums? First off, this was the album I first heard She Loves You on. My godfather Richard had the Apple repressing of it that came out in the late 60s, early 70s, and I remember as a toddler standing on a stool and listening to She Loves You with the side 2, the sliced apple side, going around and around, and something about She Loves You and the sliced apple clicked for me. I don't know, but that's when it clicked for me. And She Loves You is still one of my top 5 Beatles songs. The Beatles had a compilation called Rock and Roll Music. This could technically be called the Beatles' Rock and Roll Music. This is a rockin' album. There's not really a ballad on here, unless you count You Really Got a Hold on Me and Devil in Her Heart as ballads. But there really is not a ballad on here. This is all rock, all hard-hitting classic rock is the way the Beatles during this period can do it. That's why this is probably, after the Hey Jude album, one of my favorites, probably my favorite of the US albums, because it works as an album. It's got a flow to it the way the US Rubber Soul album did. And it's just good, simple rock tunes that make you want to dance and make you feel good. And that's why whenever I reach for a US album, I grab this one. We could get into how they started going downhill, you could say, with the Beatles 6 and the Help soundtrack. But in 64, Dave Dexter was doing what he could to really show all facets of the Beatles. Like I said on my last one, have to give the devil his due, and he does deserve some claps. So you got to hand it to him, and you got to hand it to Capitol. Beatles' second album, a classic, a must-have. Again, you got to get the UK and the US the way, and you got to get the mono, you got to get the stereo. And just like on the reissue of Meet the Beatles, it says right here, track 6 on side 1 and tracks 1, 2, 4, and 5 on side 2 are pure mono mixes. All others are fold-down mono mixes made by Capitol from the Stereo Masters, which includes various things like the famous Dave Dexter echo. When we talk about Beatles 65, I will address that. Spoiler alert, you won't be disappointed. So thank you very much. It's my thoughts on the Beatles' second album of the US albums, and technically their third in the US, but that's a whole other cup of meat, as Bob Dylan said in Quinn the Eskimo, the Mighty Quinn. Talk to you soon, and thanks for coming in my room today.